I never meant to fall for the single mother who moved in next door. I'm the kind of man who keeps to himself, fixes what's broken, and minds his own fence. Then a storm took down the fence between our yards, and I watched her try to hold the posts up alone with a child on her hip. I told myself I was just being a decent neighbor when I walked over with my hammer. I had no idea her daughter would learn my name that same afternoon, or ask me to stay for dinner before the week was out, or change the whole shape of my quiet life. My name is Daniel, and I'm 36 years old, which is old enough to have stopped explaining why I live the way I do. I rent a small clapboard house on a street where the trees have been here longer than any of us. The yards run long and narrow back toward a line of old oaks, and the paint on my place has faded to the color of wet sand. The porch sags a little on the left side, but it's mine to look after, and looking after things is mostly what I do. I wake up before the light, drink my coffee on the steps, and listen to the street come up, one house at a time. That's the part of the day I like best, the part before anyone needs anything from me. I work with my hands, carpentry, small repairs, the kind of fix-it jobs that neighbors won't do themselves and won't pay a real contractor for. Some weeks are full, and some weeks I'm tightening a hinge just to keep busy. It pays enough to keep the lights on and the fridge stocked, and it leaves me alone with my thoughts more than is probably good for a man. People around here know me as quiet and dependable, the one you call when a pipe leaks at night. They don't know much else about me, and I've never pushed them to. I've been alone long enough that the quiet stopped feeling lonely and started feeling like the weather. You don't argue with the weather, you just dress for it. My evenings all look the same. I cook something simple, eat it standing at the counter, wash the one plate, and sit on the porch until the dark sends me in. The phone doesn't ring much after 9. Some nights I catch myself talking to no one, a sentence here and there about the day, and then I notice what I'm doing and stop. That's the part I don't tell people. If you've ever lived like that, you know it doesn't feel like sadness. It feels like settling. You stop reaching for anything, and after a while you forget there was anything to reach for. I had a life before this quiet, a woman I almost married, a version of myself that made plans past the end of the week. That was years back, and the details don't matter now. What matters is that when it fell apart, I decided the safer thing was to stop wanting, and I got good at it the way you get good at anything you practice every day. So when the moving truck pulled up next door on a Tuesday morning, I didn't think much of it. The house had been empty through the winter, the yard gone to seed, the fence between our places leaning drunk against the wind. I watched from behind the curtain, not meaning to, the way you watch anything that breaks the routine. A woman got out first, brown hair tied back, tired around the eyes, but moving with a kind of purpose that says she's done this before and will do it again. Then a small girl spilled out of the cab, all elbows and sneakers, and went running across the dead lawn like she'd been waiting her whole life for a yard. I figured they'd keep to themselves, the way everyone on this street does, the way I do. But before the mother even knew I was there, the girl found the gap in the old fence and pressed her face through it. 2 eyes and a gap-toothed grin, and a wave like we'd already met. I lifted a hand back, just a small one, and something in my chest moved that I hadn't felt in a long time. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself that about a lot of things back then. The fence between our yards had been a problem before she ever arrived. The posts were old cedar, half rotted at the base, and the whole thing leaned toward my side like it was trying to get away from the wind. I'd been meaning to fix it for a year, the way you mean to do things you don't actually need to do. Then the storm came through on a Friday night, the kind that turns the sky green and makes the dogs howl. By morning the fence was done. 3 posts snapped, a long section laid flat across the property line, boards scattered into my flower bed like thrown cards. I was out at 6 assessing the damage when I heard her on the other side. She was already out there, in a jacket too thin for the morning, trying to muscle one of the broken posts upright by herself. She braced it with her knee while she dug at the base with a spade. And there was the girl, maybe 5 or 6, hanging onto her mother's leg with one hand and holding a little plastic hammer in the other. Charlotte, that was her name, though I didn't know it yet, was doing the work of 2 adults with a child attached to her. Her face was set in a way that said she would rather break than ask. I told myself to stay on my side. I told myself it wasn't my fence, wasn't my problem, and that the safest thing a man like me can do is keep his help to himself. I watched her wrestle that post for another minute, watched it slip and nearly take her to the ground, watched the girl yank her arm at exactly the wrong moment. Then I was already walking over with my toolbox before I'd finished arguing with myself. I set the box down on her side of the line and said I had posts and the right nails in my shed, and I could have the worst of it standing again by lunch if she'd let me. She looked at me the way a stray cat looks at a hand reaching down, half wanting it and half ready to run. She said she couldn't pay me much, and I said I wasn't talking about pay. She said she'd rather do it herself, and her voice cracked on the word herself in a way that told me she'd been doing everything herself for a long time. She was tired, down to the bone. I didn't push. I just picked up the post she'd been fighting and held it plumb, and after a second, she picked up the spade again. That was how it started, with her too proud to say yes, and me too stubborn to walk away. Up close, she was younger than I'd thought, late 20s maybe, with calluses on her hands that matched mine, and a smear of mud across her cheek she didn't know was there. She kept a careful 3 feet between us the whole time, polite to the point of walls, and once she called me sir until I told her my name was Daniel and she could use it. Charlotte, she said back, and the girl immediately announced that her name was Lily and that she had a hammer too. I told Lily her hammer was the most important one on the job, and she nodded like I'd confirmed something she already knew. By mid-morning, we had 2 posts set and the worst section braced, and she let me take the broken boards away to my pile. She thanked me too fast and too many times, the way people do when they're afraid of owing something they can't repay. I told her it was just a fence. But it wasn't just a fence, and I think we both knew that even then, standing on opposite sides of a line that didn't exist anymore. I said I'd come back the next morning with the right nails to finish the job, and I meant it as one morning, just one, the way you mean a small favor. I had no idea it would become the first of 100 mornings. I came back the next day and the day after that because the fence turned out to be worse than either of us thought, and because I was looking for reasons before I'd admitted it to myself. The work was simple and good, the kind that fills your hands and empties your head. We fell into a rhythm of passing tools and holding boards without needing to talk much. Charlotte worked hard, harder than most men I know, but she had a way of waiting for me to lift the heavy end before she'd grip hers, a small trust she didn't seem to notice she was giving. The silence between us stopped feeling like walls and started feeling like something else, the way quiet does between 2 people who are figuring out they don't need to fill it. Lily was the bridge, the only one of us with no distance to keep. She appointed herself the nail girl on the first morning, and she took the job with a seriousness I've seen grown men fail to bring to their work. She'd line up the nails in a row on the board, hand them to me one at a time, and watch me drive each one with the focus of someone defusing a bomb. Somewhere around the 3rd nail she asked my name, and I told her, and she repeated it back 3 times until she had it. Then she turned to her mother and announced that his name was Daniel, as though she'd solved a great mystery. After that I was Daniel, never the neighbor, never the man, always the name, and it made me feel more seen than I had in years. In the gaps between hammering, Charlotte let things slip the way someone does when their hands are busy and their guard is down. She'd moved here for quiet, she told me, for a yard the girl could run in, for a place where the rent was low enough that one income could hold it. She didn't say from what, and I didn't ask, because I know what it's like to have a story you only hand over when you're ready. But I gathered the shape of it. A marriage that ended, a family that didn't help, a long stretch of doing it alone and learning not to expect anyone to stay. The way she said the word alone, flat and dry, like she was describing the weather, told me more than the details would have. I gave her things back in return, small pieces, the kind you trade when you sense the other person is trusting you and you want to match it. I told her I'd lived on this street for 4 years, and that before that I'd drifted some, took work where I found it, kept my life small enough to fit in a truck bed. I told her I was better with wood and tools than I was with people, and she allowed that she'd already figured as much. And I told her I liked fixing things because broken things make sense once you know where the failure is. People, I said, aren't like that. And she laughed, a short, surprised laugh, and said no, they really aren't. The moment I remember most from that week isn't any of the repairs. Lily had been insisting on driving her own nail, and I'd finally given her one in a soft spot and let her swing. She bent it clean in half on the second strike, looked at it, looked at me, and said with total calm that it was supposed to do that. Charlotte laughed then, a real one, the first I'd heard from her. A sound that seemed to surprise even her, like she'd forgotten she could make it. I laughed too, and for a second the three of us were just people in a yard, and the careful distance Charlotte kept didn't exist at all. When the fence was finally standing again, straight and solid for the first time in years, I should have packed up my tools and gone home. Instead, I lingered, wiping down a hammer that didn't need wiping, sorting nails that were already sorted, looking for any reason not to walk back to my empty porch. Charlotte noticed, I could tell, because she started finding small jobs for me, a gate hinge here, a board there, not because they needed doing, but because she'd seen me stalling and didn't want me to go either. We both pretended it was about the fence. We were both lying, and we both knew it, and neither of us said so. What I didn't expect was how fast that little girl would pull me into the center of their lives. One afternoon with a hammer made me harder to give up than I'd ever meant to be. Once the fence was fixed, I told myself the helping was done, and I'd go back to my side of the line and my quiet evenings. That lasted about 2 days. On the third morning, I was out on my porch with my coffee, and a voice came over the fence before I'd even set the cup down. Lily yelled my name loud enough to wake the whole street, told me to look, and said she was drawing. I walked to the fence, and there she was on the other side with a fistful of crayons and a piece of cardboard, holding up a picture of a purple house and a yellow dog that didn't exist. I told her it was the best dog I'd ever seen, and she beamed at me like I'd handed her a trophy. That was the end of my plan to keep my distance. After that, Lily called for me every time she spotted me outside, and I found myself timing my mornings to hers without admitting it. I'd hear the back door slap and the sneakers on the gravel, and something in me would settle, like a clock that had been running a little fast, finally catching the right time. She'd press her face into the gap in the fence, the same gap that had never been fixed, and tell me the important news of her day, which was usually about a bug she'd found or a thing her mama had said. I'd lean on the fence and listen, and more than once I realized I was smiling for no reason. That's a strange thing to notice about yourself when you've forgotten you do it. Charlotte thawed in small degrees, the way ice does when the light changes. She stopped calling me sir, then stopped thanking me for every little thing, then started leaving a mug out on the porch rail on the mornings she knew I'd be working in the yard. She never made a point of it and never knocked. She just left it there, steaming in the cold, and I'd pick it up and drink it leaning against the rail, and it was the best coffee I'd ever had. There's a kind of care that doesn't ask for anything back. She was learning to give it, and I was learning to take it, and neither of us called it what it was. I kept finding small things to fix on her side without being asked, because I couldn't help myself, and because each one was an excuse to be near. A window that had been painted shut, a porch step that rocked when you stood on it, the gate latch that wouldn't catch no matter how you jiggled it. Each repair took 10 minutes and gave me an hour, since Lily would appear the moment she heard a hammer, and Charlotte would come out with that mug. We'd end up sitting on her steps, talking about nothing, while the light moved across the yard. I told myself I was just being neighborly, and I was lying every time, and the lie got thinner every week. The evening that changed something I didn't see coming was an ordinary one. Lily had been drawing at the fence, and she pressed a piece of paper through the gap toward me without saying anything. I took it, and it was a crayon picture of 3 stick figures, 2 tall and 1 small, standing in front of a house with a crooked chimney. There was a fence in the picture too, with a big gap in the middle, and the 3 figures were holding hands through the gap. I asked who they were, and she said it was me and Mama and her at our house, and she said it like it was just a fact, like there had never been a question about it. I took that drawing home and put it on my fridge with a magnet from a pizza place that had closed 2 years ago, and I stood in my kitchen looking at it for a long time. 3 stick figures, a house, and a gap in the fence. A child had drawn me into her family like I'd always been there, and the ache of it sat in my chest, heavy and warm and terrifying. That night I caught myself thinking about Charlotte, not Lily, about the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. I told myself to stop, and I didn't stop, and I lay awake a long time listening to the quiet. It used to feel like peace. Now it felt like the size of the thing I was starting to want. Maybe that was the moment I should have walked away, latched the gate for good, and let the gap in the fence grow over. But I didn't, because the truth of it was I didn't want to go back to the way it was before them, and I was starting to suspect I couldn't. It was a Thursday evening when the thing I'll remember for the rest of my life happened, and it started with nothing at all. I was over on Charlotte's side, tightening the gate hinge, the one I'd deliberately left a little loose so I'd have a reason to come back. A small dishonesty I wasn't proud of, but couldn't seem to quit. The sky had gone that gold color it gets in the hour before the light goes, and Charlotte was on the porch, sorting a basket of laundry, folding small shirts into neat stacks, while Lily ran circles in the yard with a stick she'd decided was a horse. It was the kind of ordinary evening that doesn't announce itself, the kind you only realize mattered when you look back. I was just about to call it a night when Lily dropped the stick and made a beeline for the porch, her sneakers slapping the boards. She stopped right in front of her mother, put her hands on her hips, and said, loud enough that I heard every word across the yard, that Daniel should stay for dinner. It wasn't a question the way kids ask questions with hedging and hope. It was a statement of what she thought should obviously happen, delivered with the absolute certainty of a child who has already decided the seating arrangement. Charlotte went still in a way I could see from 20 feet away. Her hand stopped mid-fold, and I watched something cross her face that I recognized because I'd felt it myself. The fear that comes when you realize how much someone has gotten in without your permission. She looked at Lily, then at me, then at the empty chair at the little table I could see through the screen door. I could see her doing the math that single mothers do, the cost of letting someone close weighed against the cost of what it does to the child when they leave. I gave her the out before she had to reach for it. I stood up and said I should get going, that it was getting late, that I'd finish the hinge another time. All the polite things a man says when he's trying to make it easy for someone to send him home. I was already turning toward the gate when Charlotte said my name, just my name, and I stopped. She was looking at me with that expression I'd come to know, the tired and the proud and the wanting all stacked on top of each other. Then she said, "Stay." The kitchen was small and warm and smelled like something with tomatoes that had been cooking slow all day. There were 3 chairs around the table, and one of them had a booster seat strapped to it, and Charlotte set a plate in front of me like it was the most natural thing in the world. It felt like the most natural thing in the world, and that scared me more than anything. Lily talked without stopping for the entire meal, narrating her whole life to me in fragments. The bug, the dog she wanted, the way the fence had a hole, and that was good because now Daniel could come through. Charlotte kept glancing at me when she thought I wouldn't notice, watching the way I talked to her daughter and the way I cut my bread into the shape of a boat when Lily asked. After dinner, Lily climbed into my lap on the porch swing, against Charlotte's half-hearted protest, and fell asleep there within 10 minutes, her fist still holding the hem of my shirt. I didn't move for an hour. I didn't move because I didn't want to wake her, and I didn't move because moving would mean the evening was over, and I wasn't ready for it to be over. Charlotte sat beside me on the swing, not touching, both of us watching the dark settle over the yards. The silence between us was full instead of empty, and I understood for the first time that this was no longer about a fence. A child had opened a door I'd been too careful to touch, and now I was inside, holding her daughter, and there was no honest way to pretend I was just the man with the hammer anymore. The dinners didn't stop after that. They became the shape of my week, the thing the rest of the days arranged themselves around without anyone saying it out loud. Charlotte would leave the gate unlatched on the evenings she wanted me there, and I'd come through it with my hands clean for once, and the 3 of us would eat at that little table while Lily told us everything. On the nights I wasn't invited, I'd sit on my porch and feel the absence of it, the way you feel a tooth that's been pulled, the space where the thing used to be. I started keeping a clean shirt folded in my truck, which is the kind of detail that would have embarrassed me if I'd stopped to think about it. I learned Lily's bedtime story, the one she demanded every single night without variation, and I learned to read it with the voices, the deep one for the bear and the squeaky one for the mouse. She'd correct me when I got them wrong, which was often. Charlotte would lean in the doorway and watch, and sometimes I'd catch her smiling in a way she was trying to hide, and I'd read a little louder just to cover the sound of my own heart. When Lily finally went down, her hand still wrapped around my finger, I'd ease it free and stand there a moment too long, not ready to leave the small warm room where I'd started to feel like I belonged. After Lily slept, Charlotte and I would take the porch, and that was where the real things came out, the truths that only surface at night between people whose hands are finally still. She told me about the marriage, the one that ended the year Lily was born, how he left one Tuesday for milk and kept going, and how she'd spent the years since pretending that was fine. She told me she was tired in a way sleep didn't fix, tired of being the only adult in the house, tired of making every decision alone and then doubting every one of them. I didn't have answers for her, I just listened, and sometimes that's the whole job, to be the person who stays in the chair while someone says the thing they've been carrying. I gave her things back in the dark, the things I never tell anyone in the daylight. I told her the quiet in my house used to feel like peace, and that somewhere along the way it had turned into something else, a kind of cold I'd gotten so used to I didn't notice it until she and Lily warmed the air on the other side of the fence. I told her I'd spent years teaching myself not to want anything, and that the trouble with that was I'd gotten so good at it I almost missed the thing I wanted when it showed up. She didn't say anything for a while after that. She just sat close enough that I could feel the warmth of her not touching, and the not touching was its own kind of conversation. There was a night we both reached for the same mug on the rail, and our fingers brushed, and neither of us pulled away, and neither of us closed the distance. We stood there with our hands on that mug, not speaking, and the air between us felt like the moment before a held breath lets go. Then she took the mug and stepped back, and said something about the dishes, and the moment passed. I went home and lay in the dark and understood that I was in love with her and that it was already too late to pretend otherwise. It had crept in the way warmth does when you've been standing in the cold a long time and you finally step inside, and by the time I noticed, it was everywhere. I knew it was going to scare her the way it was starting to scare me, because wanting something this much is its own kind of risk. We were two people who'd built whole lives around not risking anything, and I knew, even in the good part, that the closer we got, the more likely it was that one of us would flinch first. It was Lily who set it off, the way children set off the real crises without ever knowing they're doing it. Charlotte had been watching for weeks as her daughter rearranged her whole life around me, drawing me into the pictures, saving me a seat at the table, calling for me the moment she woke. One morning I came through the gate and Lily ran at me full speed and launched herself into my arms, and I caught her and swung her up, and she said, clear as a bell, that she wished I lived there. She meant nothing by it. She was 5. Charlotte, standing in the doorway with that mug, went white, and I watched her put the fear away behind her face before Lily could see it. I knew then that the wall was coming back. The fear was the kind I understood, because I'd carried a version of it myself. Charlotte had a running tally in her head of every person who'd ever left, and the math was simple and merciless. The more Lily loved me, the more it would cost the child when I went, because in Charlotte's experience, everyone went. That was just what people did. The only way to keep the damage small was to keep the love small. She wasn't being cruel. She was trying to protect the most important thing in her world, and the cruelest part was that the thing she was protecting the girl from was starting to look a lot like the thing the girl actually needed. A few mornings later, Charlotte met me at the gate before I could come through. She was kind about it, which made it worse, the way kindness always makes a cut cleaner. She said she thought they should keep things neighborly for a while, that Lily was getting too attached, that it wasn't fair to me or to her daughter to let it keep going the way it was going. She said it looking at the gate latch instead of at me, and her voice was steady in the way that voices get steady right before they break. I heard the real thing under the words, which was that she was scared, and that she'd decided the safest move was to push us out before we could walk out on our own. I could have argued. I could have said what I was starting to know was true, that I wasn't going anywhere, that the gate and the fence and the mug on the rail had stopped being neighborly a long time ago. But I've been the person someone doesn't want to hear it from, and I knew that pushing a frightened person only makes them push harder. So I told her I understood, and that I'd respect it, and I picked up the toolbox I'd been carrying and set it down on my side of the line. Then I did the thing I'd been avoiding for months. I fixed the gate latch so it finally closed all the way, and I walked back to my porch and didn't look back. The days after were the quietest I'd had since before they moved in, and the quiet was a different animal now, mean where it used to be neutral. No voice came over the fence in the mornings, no mug appeared on the rail. I'd see Lily press her face to the gate and look through the slats toward my porch, and I'd have to look away, because the sight of her small, confused face was more than I could stand and keep my word. Charlotte kept her inside more, I think to spare the girl the asking. Once I heard Lily ask where Daniel was, in that clear voice, and Charlotte didn't have an answer that didn't break something, so she just said he was busy. I sat on my porch and heard it through the fence and felt every crack in the word busy. I understood for the first time how loud the silence had been before she came, because now it was deafening, full of the shape of them instead of empty of it. I'd built a whole life around not needing anyone, and in a few short months, a woman and a child had walked through a gap in a fence and proved me a liar. Now the gap was closed, and I was back where I started, except I knew exactly what I was missing. Both of us were miserable, and both of us were pretending it was the right call, and the pretending was the only thing we had in common anymore. Then a night came when pride couldn't hold, because the child needed me and Charlotte couldn't do it alone, and all the careful walls she'd built were about to be tested by the one thing she couldn't plan for. It was past 2 a.m. when I saw the light. I'd been lying awake, which had become my habit since the pullback, staring at the ceiling and running the same useless loop of what I should have said at the gate. My window faces her yard, and the porch light there is on a timer that cuts off at 11, so when I saw it burning at 2:30, steady and yellow through the trees, I knew something was wrong before I was even out of bed. Then I saw that the gate was open, the latch I'd fixed hanging loose, and that was all I needed. I pulled on my coat and my boots and crossed the yard without stopping to think. Thinking was the thing that had kept me on my side for weeks, and I was done with it. Charlotte was on the kitchen floor when I came in, not sitting but kind of collapsed against the cabinets, and Lily was in her arms, small and hot and too still. The fever had come on fast, Charlotte said, her voice shaking in a way I'd never heard it shake, climbing through the evening until the girl started to burn and wouldn't come down. She'd been alone with it for hours, torn between bundling her into the truck for the hospital and waiting it out, afraid of the drive in the dark with a burning child and no one to hand the fear to. She'd looked at the porch light, she told me later, and at the gate, and she'd turned the light on and left the gate open. She'd told herself that if he comes, he comes, and if he doesn't, she'd do it alone, the way she always had. I didn't take over. That's what mattered, I think, the part that made it different from every other person who'd ever come into her life. I didn't push her aside and fix it like a man with a hammer. I knelt down next to her and put my hand on Lily's forehead, which was too hot. And then I put my other hand on Charlotte's back, and I said we'd handle it together. That was the word that broke her. Together. Because no one had said it to her in years. We got cool cloths and laid them on the girl's neck and wrists, and I sat in the chair by her little bed while Charlotte sat on the floor and leaned against my leg, and neither of us moved for the rest of the night. Somewhere around 4, Charlotte started to shake, the delayed fear finally hitting her now that someone else was there to hold the weight. I put my hand on her shoulder and didn't say anything, because there's nothing to say at 4 a.m. except, I'm here. And I'm here is its own kind of everything. She cried without making a sound, the way a person does once they've trained themselves not to need comfort and then suddenly can't help it. I held still and let her, and the holding still was the most useful thing I'd ever done with my hands. The fever held through the dark hours, and I watched the clock and changed the cloths and kept my palm on the girl's head. It was the longest night of my life and the most certain. By morning, the fever broke. I felt it go, the slow cooling under my hand, the way a held breath lets out. Lily opened her eyes, gray and heavy, and saw me, and she didn't look surprised at all. She just reached up both arms, and I picked her up the way I'd done 100 times in her yard, and she put her head on my shoulder and went back to sleep like I was the safest place she knew. Charlotte stood in the doorway watching, her face raw and undone, and I saw the last of her wall come down, not with a crash, but with a quiet exhale, like something that had been clenched for years finally letting go. She saw, in that morning light, that I wasn't the one who leaves. I was the one who comes when the light is on. There was nothing left to figure out about whether I'd stay, because I'd never really left, and the gate she'd left open was never going to close again. The morning after the fever, the 3 of us sat on the porch in the first light, while Lily slept inside, and the quiet between us was different from any quiet we'd had before. It wasn't careful anymore, and it wasn't full of the things we weren't saying, because the night had stripped all of that out of us and left only the true parts. Charlotte looked at me with her tired eyes and said the thing she'd been too frightened to say for weeks. She said she'd pushed me away because she was afraid of how much the girl needed me and how much she needed me, and that she'd confused keeping safe with staying shut. She said she was sorry, and I told her she didn't have to be, because I'd known what the fear was the whole time, and I'd respected it because I'd carried the same fear in my own coat. I answered her the way I do everything, plainly, no poetry, because I've never been any good at the big speeches, and she'd have seen through one anyway. I told her I wasn't going anywhere, that I'd fixed the gate latch, but I'd rather leave it open, and that the quiet in my house had never been peace. It had just been the absence of a reason to come home. I told her that now there was a reason, and it had brown hair and a gap-toothed grin, and a mother who left the mug on the rail. I said I'd be here for the dinners and the fevers and the mornings and whatever else came through the gate. She didn't say anything for a long moment, and then she leaned over and put her forehead against my shoulder, and I put my arm around her, and we sat like that while the light came up. Later, under the porch light, she kissed me. It was small and tentative and chaste, the kind of kiss that isn't about wanting so much as about arriving, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world, like coming home after standing in the cold a long time. I didn't rush it, and neither did she, because we'd both waited long enough to know that the slow part was the point, and that the ache of almost had been doing its work this whole time, building something worth keeping. I held her hand, and she let me, and the porch light buzzed above us, and I thought that this was the kind of moment that stays with a person long after the night ends. The days after were ordinary, and that was the best part. The third chair stayed at the table, the one with the booster seat next to it, and I stopped going home to my porch after dinner because the door on her side stayed unlocked, and no one expected me to leave. Lily drew a new picture, 4 figures this time, the 3 of us and a yellow dog that still didn't exist, in front of a house with a fence that had no gate at all. She put it on my fridge next to the first one, and I stood there, looking at the 2 of them side by side, the gap in the fence drawn and then erased, and I understood that a child had shown us the whole story before we'd lived it. The fence stands straight and solid now, the best work I've ever done, and the gate in the middle of it never latches anymore, and that's the whole point. A little girl opened the door before either of us was brave enough, and the smallest invitation changed 2 quiet lives. If my story warmed your heart, leave a comment and let me know which moment got you the most.